Curl up with a mug of autumn spice and your favorite Bluetooth listening device. This is Things I Found Online, and today we are proud to present a podcast about podcasts. Oh, to thunk it. Or how to start your own podcast. How do you improve the show you have? How do you find a podcast more entertaining than this one? Short answer, you don't. I am Jack Daniel, and I will now skillfully toss to my intriguing co-host, Louise Palanker. Louise.
That was gripping, Jack. Thank you. One day, when you Google the words, how to start a podcast, the top search result will be this podcast. On this show, we have Michael Lenz from Podcast Snap, Scott Mayton from Benstown, and Ted Willett from the Trailer Junkies podcast and also other adventures in life. Welcome, panel. Are you there, Michael?
I am here.
Where are you? What room are you in?
I'm right next door to you in your living room, I think, right?
Damn it.
Where you put me?
That's what most living rooms look like.
And you couldn't make the commute. Okay.
He's just very shy man.
I get it. I like the soundproofing.
I couldn't make it in time, so you stuck me in the living room. But here I am.
There you are. Currently, when we Google how to start a podcast, the first result is an ad from Podbean. So they're right on top of that. And then we have pages and pages of results. What percentage of humans per capita in any given town already have their own podcast? Well, according to Podcast Insights, there are over 550,000 podcasts.
Now, how do they define podcast in giving that statistic?
I mean, sometimes it's a guy with a megaphone on the corner. It's like, I have a goat for sale. 44% of the U.S. population has listened to a podcast. 49% of podcast listening is done at home. Podcast listeners are loyal, affluent, and educated. Congratulations. As of this recording, there were still slightly more podcasts than listeners. So we've got work to do. If you are thinking about getting started, then we and the internet are here to help you. The top search results on how to start a podcast are from podcasthost.com, Anchor.fm, and interestingly, Shopify gets the third spot with a whole list of crap you need to invest in order to have a podcast. So I'm going to go to the experts. Who are these people that occupy all these top page search results for how do you start a podcast, and what are they trying to sell us?
Well, most of those that you're looking at a lot of them are hosting companies. So they're going to compete with the Blueberries and the Libsyns out there, which I think we'll talk about in a little while. Mm-hmm. But a lot of them they are companies where you can host your podcast. And then they all kind of differ a little bit in what they do. Some of them provide means for you to actually record. Some of them do marketing and advertising where you can insert ads. People can insert ads onto their podcast. So there's a whole, we're going to talk about this, but there's a whole kind of plethora of options that people have out there when they're thinking about starting a podcast. And these companies have kind of figured out all the different things you need to do, but they all of us kind of do them a little bit differently, but we're all kind of doing the same thing. So primarily those ones that you mentioned are, I think most of their focus is on, at least their main focus is on providing hosting so that somebody can actually host their podcast with them and get it up to the world.
So when I look at the podcasting space, what I see is kind of a lot of people taking advantage of what I call the Levi Strauss model of revenue creating, which is like you're not actually going to dig for gold. You're going to sell stuff to the people digging for gold. So we're all the idiot gold miners. And then people like Michael are like, oh, you guys are digging for gold? You're going to need pants. So who's making the most money, Michael? Is it people who have podcasts, or is it people selling things to people who have podcasts?
Well, you and I have had this conversation, Wheezy, where you see some of these networks out there, like Panoply, which is a network they did create podcasts for a while, and now they're shifting into this whole area where they're going to go after the advertising dollars because people are finding that it's a really effective way to get in front of people. You get into their earbuds, and it's very effective because you have loyal listeners and you can get into their ears every week or every day or every month. So a lot of these companies, we're starting to see a shift from these companies into that area. So I would argue that the focus seems to be now on the people who are trying to get advertisers connected to podcasts, successful podcasts, where they can then embed those advertisements into the podcast and can reap the rewards of connecting the right advertisers with the right podcasts. That's kind of where I see it in terms of where the money is. that's really where I see the money coming from.
And if you mind if I interject here, Mike, I know that you do this in your own podcast, and many of my favorite podcasts do the same thing, and that is they will have the host incorporate the read of the commercial. They'll actually read it as they would in the olden days, like on old radio and TV programs where they just kind of talked about a product. But it gives it a certain integrity that I think it doesn't have when it's a pre-produced spot. Do you find that to be a growing trend, or one that's one of convenience by virtue of podcasting be a relatively new medium?
Well, I think it's a little bit of both. I think people figured out, they know from the radio days that if you have a host that your audience relates to have them talk about whatever it is you're trying to sell makes more sense because you have built-in credibility as the host. So there's always that advantage that you have by having the host do those kind of embedded reads, as we call them. So you're actually pitching whoever is sponsoring your podcast right on the show, which is what I do. But there's also this whole dynamic of this dynamic insertion that now they're talking about, where they can actually figure out spots within the podcast where they're going to dynamically insert a pre-done ad. And then you have this ability to every single time that you listen to a podcast, it can be completely different from an advertising perspective. Whereas when you and I, if I'm hosting a podcast and I'm embedded in there and I'm actually doing the read, that's baked in. So that's kind of stuck. So if somebody, for example, came and wanted to listen to my VO podcast, and I've got close to 100 episodes, if somebody wanted to go back and say, I'm going to start at the beginning and go all the way through these podcasts, then they're just going to hear me talking. Even if I have a sponsor, they're going to hear me. But with dynamic ad insertion, if they go back to the first episode, they can actually embed advertising in the very first episode you ever launched, and they can change it throughout the different episodes. So that's a pretty cool innovation that's happening right now as we speak.
So it's still a pre-recorded read. It's still your voice. It's not like it's a commercial. It's still you talking about a product.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah, right now on my podcast it is, and that's where you find that on a lot of podcasts.
But the thing you're
essentially talking about remonetizing original podcasts, though, right? With new advertising dollars that are injected into it.
Exactly.
But the thing you're talking about is like Acast, where the dynamic ad insertion is actually a pre-recorded advertisement for something that maybe the listeners, it's focused to the listener. Same way when you browse online, you see ads that are geared towards your Amazon searches and things like that.
Not quite yet. That is
Right.
what I learned from our friend Charles at NYC.
Yeah, they haven't perfected.
That is the end goal, though, right?
I think so, yes.
I would think this would make rate setting so much easier because you know what the cycle, as it were, would be, right, for each ad. And it actually gives it a shelf life as opposed to a commercial from 10 years ago when you listen to a really old podcast. It means nothing anymore.
Right.
Yeah, the difficulty I think with rate setting right now is that the the ratings measurement system is not in place, right? Like there is no real one uniform way, the way there is in TV or radio that everybody subscribed to rate the podcast and to give them a certain amount of value. So that makes it very tough to set those rates.
Well, let's talk a little bit about where you occupy space in the podcast universe, and then introduce you, Ted, and you, Scott.
Okay. So, yeah, my name is Ted Willett, and I'm one of the co-hosts of Trailer Junkies podcast. And my buddy and I started it just on a whim over a year ago. And I think we initially started it, obviously, like everybody else, to dig for gold. But we found out that the digging was the fun part. So we stopped, and I took a back seat on trying to figure out how to monetize it. And I switched it because I'm in marketing. I switched it to more of a brand offering. So this is more of a brand offering of myself as someone that is in entertainment marketing. And, I basically, ran it by Jimmy and was like, Jimmy, I don't know whether this is going to make us any money, but for me, it's a fun way to get, over decades worth of media marketing knowledge out. And I don't get it out, in the board meetings and things like that I'm in on a weekly basis. So it was a fun way to get that out there and to expand my brand as a personal brand. Last week I spoke at CSUN, California State University Northridge, my alma mater, for my MBA, and they brought me in for media marketing, and they did it because the professor had heard me on the podcast. So it's part of the expanding exposure that you get from having something that's a calling card that's more than social media. You can say a lot of things in social media, but if you have a bed of work that's now, we're at 40 episodes. You guys are at 50 episodes. It's an offering. And the VO space, it's neat to see you guys doing that. I mean, it's tailored for you guys, and like my partner, Jimmy, that has a great voice. I'm trying to bring the knowledge to it, but to hear good voices and to hear quality content and quality audio is amazing now.
It's a body of work that substantiates you.
Right.
And it's like, here's my book. You're like, oh, come on, you self-published. Well, all podcasts are self-published. Come on, it's really great because it says I must be an expert. Here's 100 episodes.
Right.
How else could I have kept talking for this long? Right. Scott, tell us about your company.
Yeah, so I work at a company called Benstown. We are primarily a radio content production company. So essentially, we brand radio stations all over the world, whether that be with jingles, production libraries, voiceover, custom imaging production. And so essentially everything you hear on a radio station that's in between the songs that brands a radio station with that voiceover artist, the sound effects, music beds, artist content, that type of stuff, we're responsible for, and we touch with brands all over the place, from Cumulus to all of the big radio companies and, mom and pops in between. And, we've got about a 3,000 station affiliation at this point. And
so you must be really attuned to how the audio space is shifting from terrestrial radio into podcasting.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I think that's, one of the things that radio is finding right now is that, obviously for live and local, it's still one of the go-to sources. Something like 91 or 92% of Americans still listen to radio on a weekly basis. And so that being said, the time shifting of content is kind of king now, right? The ability to listen to anything, anywhere, at any time is kind of what everybody is shifting to. And so it's our job to be able to help these podcasters brand these shows or episodes with the most high quality products that they possibly can, right? And to also teach them how to do that. I think that's one of our biggest goals right now, is that, coming from a radio space or a television space or even a VO space, everybody pretty much knows when you're in that industry how to do those things, right? It's kind of embedded in you from when you started as a youngin in the business, I suppose. And when you jump into podcasting, it's very easy to just hit record on your phone, hit go, and upload it, right? And that happens on a regular basis in this medium.
Too many times.
Yeah, and so that's something that I think the education part of it is lacking right now, is teaching people how to do these things, right? How to have quality podcasts, and it's our job to help them come along, help them learn the DAWs, the digital audio workstations, all those kinds of things, from very basic things to multi-track editing, and then also how to brand and present various features within your podcast, whether it's a simple intro and outro, that you hear voiced live here, or that it's pre-produced, or say you have recurring weekly segments on your podcast, right? How can you create a brand identity so when you hear those things, you know what's going to happen next, right? The same thing that radio and television does. And so that's our job.
And tell us about your company, Michael, Podcast Snap.
Yeah, and it's kind of a combination of both. What the two other guys were talking about is that, Podcast Snap really came as a result of, I'm a professional voice actor like Jack, and I do a lot of e-learning and corporate work, and I ended up being asked to speak at a learning conference because of my e-learning work, and it was about the role of the voice actor in e-learning. As it turned out, after that conference, an executive from Xerox contacted me and said, hey, I want to start a podcast. And I know you have a VO podcast because I looked on your LinkedIn profile, and I need a co-host, and I know you host your own, and you're a voice actor. So can I pay you to do that for me? And I said, certainly, you can pay me to do that for you. And that really forced me to kind of systematize it, because it's one thing to do it for yourself. It's another thing to have to do it for somebody else. So that really got me into the situation where I had to come up with a system that we could create his podcast based on the different processes that you go through, and we kind of break it into 4 phases. We have a creative phase, pre-production, production, and go live phase. So it allows somebody who may not have a lot of knowledge about the podcast process, and we can walk them through each step. And we call it a concierge podcast service because, as you all know, everybody's different and every podcast is different. So there are clients that I have that want to just book an hour consult with me to help get over a hump. Or I have people that just want me to edit their podcast for them. I have other people that want me to fully produce and co-host their podcast for them. We have clients that we create the podcast artwork for them. I've created a virtual team that will do that for them. If they want a website created for their podcast, I have a web designer that can help them do that. So it's a virtual team, and it's concierge because it's not a one size fits all process. A lot of these websites that you go to will walk you through the steps, which is great. But there's always the little things, the little question that you forgot to answer or they forgot to ask, that you need to be there. And so for me, it's more hands-on. So when they hire me, I'm with them for as long as they need me, for whatever they need me for, and whatever our team can do to help them get from creation to launch and everything in between. So that's what we do.
That sounds really interesting, because then you're sort of forced to stay several steps ahead of every curve so that you can answer all of these upcoming questions, like what's the next trend, where do I need to be, how do I where should my show be visible?
Yeah, well, it's like anything, right? When you become really good at something, quote unquote an expert, then you sort of forget that somebody that's just beginning doesn't know what microphone to pick, doesn't know how to record their podcast. What if they have to do something remotely like you're doing? The process that you go through to get this podcast up and running is pretty extensive. So somebody that's just beginning, they don't even know the questions to ask. So they really need help every step of the way. And there are these apps out there that you can, as was mentioned, you can go grab your cell phone and record an episode, and it will probably be okay.
I wish you had told me that 6 years ago.
It probably wasn't available 6 years ago, but you know what I mean? You can do that, and there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not minimizing the ability to go do that, but if you want to take it to the next level, you want to make sure you've got everything in place, then you need people like us to kind of help you, shepherd you through that process. Let's
talk about Libsyn, Podbean. Where do we host? You can easily go to YouTube and type, how do I post my podcast? Because let's assume first you recorded your podcast, and we're going to get to that in a little bit. But I wanted to talk a little bit about hosting sites, because you only really know the site you use. It's sort of like phones. Like, I only know iPhones. I can't tell you the Android is horrible, because you'd have to live with a phone to know it. And I think it's the same for podcast hosting sites. You only know the one you're on. So I'm just curious to have a conversation about that. What do you guys recommend, and what are some of the advantages and disadvantages?
Well, we were with a company now in our first 3 months, and I forgot what their name was, seriously. But now we're with Podbean, and they're good. They're decent. To me, it's all about the community. So there's a bunch of podcasters on every platform, and if you can connect with them in some way, then that's what it's all about. It's all about the people in the end, of who you connect with and who you can talk to. This podcast, our podcasts that are this hangout podcast, I call them. I guess there's some terms.
Explain that to me, because I'm all alone with Libsyn. I don't know any of my neighbors. What should I be doing?
Well, I think it's the social aspect. I think that's what I do. My partner does all the technical stuff. We do dual records. I send him the record, then he goes off to do the edit, and he takes care of all of the editing and all the programming. I handle what we cover, and then just the communication with all of the people online, and then that includes communication with Jack, and with people on Twitter, with people on Facebook, and it
includes. You mean I'm supposed to talk to Jack?
Does
more than just this hour.
Does Podbean give you resources to communicate with other podcasters or their staff, or how does that work?
They do, but it happens kind of organically. How much you're on it. I was on it, and I found a DC podcaster, because I'm from DC, and she was Jen runs business, and she was on there, and she actually works for Podbean, and she has a Podbean podcast about podcasting. So same deal, and she helped out, and she was very helpful with resources and things like that. So and then there's people that aren't with Podbean, but they have been doing it for 15 years, because I think that's about how long it's been out.
I've been doing it my first podcast was Wheezy and the Swish. We did 100 episodes, me and Laura Swisher. And so I've been doing it since you could do it.
Yeah.
But I don't know how to make friends with other podcasters, because I'm not you, Ted. What do I do? Do I go on Libsyn and I'm from Buffalo. I would love to find a podcaster from Buffalo to be best friends with.
It sounds like Ted stalks people on the internet.
On Twitter. Twitter is built for that stalking. Film Twitter is a kind of a subset community that's very, very positive. So Twitter. I think you guys there's a lot of radio people that are doing podcasts.
How do I find them?
Tune Styles is a nice podcast. I like the radio podcasts because their quality is usually like at least listenable.
It's sort of like if you go to buy a door and you go to the store that sells doors. They better have a damn good door.
Right.
Can I ask you guys about that? Because, and Mike, this is for you too, is one of my bugaboos is sound quality. There can be some great content, but it drives me insane when it's, all this mouth noise or just bad reflective environments. What would you say is, say, the percentage of good to bad, or however you wanted to answer that? And also, is there some quick advice you could give people to help them get to a better level if they're starting out in the podcasting world?
In terms of sound quality, Jack?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And does that matter to you that much? Do you think it's an important? You just said it is, Ted, but
it's huge. I didn't think it was going to be big in the beginning. I said my content is so spot on, so important that people are going to want to listen to it regardless of how I sound. And then I recorded in my friend's bedroom with my son, and we always dual record, and then Jimmy's recording up there, and when we put it together, I'm like, I can't. It's a fun podcast, but I can't listen to it because of the way we recorded and her hard surfaces. And then I listen to other people's podcasts, and you quickly become dispelled of any notion of wanting to learn anything when you hear like the hard surfaces. And that, to me, that's the biggest thing, is the distance from the mic. Thanks, Wheezy. And the hard surfaces.
I think it's one of those things too. The barrier to entry to podcasting is so low, right? Like you can literally turn on your phone and start to do it right away. And that's also it's a gift and a curse of this medium right now, is that anybody can literally turn on their phone or whatever it is and just do one, right? And happen. And so that's why we have so many podcasts that are happening, and that's fantastic. But I think that's what also sets the few of them that are doing really well apart, right? Because they then take it to the next level and understand that they do need to invest a little bit of time and effort into the quality side of the podcast. And that, realistically doesn't have to cost you thousands of dollars, right? Like you don't have to be in a studio that's like this with correct lighting and all of this different kind of stuff to really do a podcast that at least sounds a little polished, right? Like you can do that probably with a couple $100 pretty easily.
A Scarlett,
Let's
a
cut
$50 mic.
to Michael. He's got some baffling behind him, and he can tell us, because I want to talk about hosting a little bit more before we move on, Michael. What do you recommend for your clients? You are a concierge. If they don't ask you, like, when the shuttle comes that takes them to the museum, do they ask you what to buy, and where'd Michael go?
They do. Yeah,
there
they
he is.
do. I'm here. They do. And, I think, and just following up on what was already said, and I mentioned that earlier, that you can start a podcast on your phone. So the ease of entry is very, very, the bar is very low in terms of getting into the podcasting game, but that doesn't mean you should do it that way. And I think that quality, that once you start listening to podcasts and you hear the different quality, then you do start to pay attention to it, and you do notice when the quality's not that good. So yeah, I'm in my home recording studio. So behind me is some acoustic foam. So my studio has acoustic foam in it. Not everybody has that. But when I was working with clients, I'll have them either buy something that surrounds the microphone, because that is the most important place where you need that sound treatment. But if you can get into a small space, a space where that doesn't have a lot of ambient noise, I've had clients who are recording in an office building where people are walking back and forth and the sirens are going outside the window. That's not great, and if you can't do anything else, then okay. But you have to make sure that you get, probably the most important aspect of recording is to make sure that you're in a space that's relatively quiet and not cavernous, so that, as we talked about, the hard sounds, that it's not bouncing all over the room. And then you get into the technicalities of the microphone. I mean, I have a Blue Yeti here that I'm using for podcasting. This is what I use to podcast. It's not what I use to record for voiceover, but this is good enough for podcasting. It's a USB microphone. So there are other options that people have. You can get microphones that have both, XLR cables and USB. So you have the option to do both. And those are important things to think about, especially, well, not especially, but depending on what type of podcast you're doing, and we can even kind of shift into that area, because is it just one person talking? Are there multiple hosts? Are you doing remote recording? Are you out in the field recording people, or actually going to other people? So that's going to affect the decision in terms of what kind of microphone you use and how you go about setting up your whole your whole work area.
Also, too, I mean, in terms of the type of podcast, I think it's a very good point in terms of it being an open discussion kind of roundtable like this, or is it a story that you're telling, right? Is it scripted out? I mean, then there's so many different aspects that go into that. If it's a scripted out podcast where you have to do a bunch of post production and all those kinds of things, you're going to approach the production of that podcast completely different than you would turning on the mics and going.
And if it's documentary style, you accept a wider range of sound quality because you're like, oh, wow. You know,
That
your
gives it
mind goes to like,
authenticity,
oh,
right?
we're getting to hear this, and you're not
Totally.
expecting it to be perfect.
Totally. Yeah.
And that also throws this 550,000 podcast number into a kind of a nebulous space because of pod fading, from people giving up on podcasting because they were so, they could do it on their phone, but then why would they stay with it? Or if there's limited series, like you're saying, if there's something creative that they're doing, telling a story, then that just means it's a podcast that's a narrative podcast. So I would say over half, maybe 2/3 of that are things that aren't active now.
Yeah, I would love to see a statistic about how many podcasts are out there now that have more than X number, that have more than 10. I bet if you did the research, if you could even find it, there's probably, as you said, a big majority.
Yeah, I've seen numbers, and it's about 2/3, and that's part of the reason I enjoy the Twitter sphere as far as like activating and connecting with podcasters, because a lot of times I'll see 100 podcasts and I'll be like, oh, this is great, and it was very recent. But if they're not active somewhere in the social media space, then there's no way to get in touch with them, to interact with them, and then there's no way to know that they're going to keep doing, what they're doing.
And I guess to that point too, one of the questions that's raised with that is it about quantity or quality, right? Because Netflix seasons with shows come out and they have 10 episodes, right?
Yeah.
Serial comes
eight
out.
for-
Serial comes out with the season and it has 10 episodes or
mean,
whatever it is. And
If
so
that
it's
was
very
your
different.
intention, then that's great. But if you have if you start a podcast with the intention of continuing your podcast and you just kind of drop off, it's like podcasting is like a relationship. You may want to date a girl a few times, but to be in it for the long distance is a commitment. And that means that some weeks you would really rather, she went to a different house for several nights. But, she's coming back here.
Right.
And that's a relationship. It's like, I have to do this work every week. And that's not for everyone. It's a great concept. It's a great idea to be able to say, I have a podcast. But the actual work that necessitates to put it out regularly and consistently with quality every week, you have to decide that you're going to do that and not change your mind. Or say it's a limited series and then surprise everybody, but when you keep going.
Right.
But I wanted to talk to you about hosting, Michael, because you're a concierge and you're giving people advice. Do you send them to the same location for hosting their show?
As a rule, yes. I mean, I use Libsyn like you, and I use it because that's what was recommended to me when I first started, and it works great for me, and it serves its purpose. I know there are others out there, like Blueberry is one that's I've heard from other podcasters is pretty popular, and even places like Podbean. I mean, there are. And they're all essentially doing the same thing. I mean, your goal is you need to get your podcast out to the world, and you need this company that's kind of serves as an intermediary to house your podcast and your RSS feed, and then it goes off to iTunes and Stitcher and Google Play and wherever else it's Spotify, wherever else it's going to go. Yeah, I mean,
Spotify.
So you kind of need a company, because you can't go directly to iTunes, so you kind of need that company that's going to house your episodes so they're available. And I don't think there's anyone that's better or worse. It's just what you're used to and what works for you. And one of the only reasons that I haven't really tried other ones is that although they tell you that it's simple to easily shift from one to the other, I always I'm a little nervous about that, and so I haven't never made the switch to any other company other than Libsyn, because that's what I started with, and I have that comfort level with it. Doesn't mean that the other companies aren't good. It's just that I'm not familiar nor comfortable with making that switch at this point.
And what else does Libsyn have to offer that people should be looking at when they shop around for a host?
Well, I'll tell you the interesting thing, and maybe the other ones do this, but I don't know whether they do, because one of the things that I found for me was that before starting Podcast Snap, but after I spoke at this other conference, I got invited to speak with my co-host of the podcast that we started, the Learning Innovations podcast, which was the executive from Xerox, we got invited to speak at another learning conference, a larger one, about the role of podcasting in the learning space within the corporate world. So using podcasts as a way to communicate with your workforce internally. So not out in the world, not on iTunes and Stitcher, but only in a secure, housed location within the organization, and using that internal podcasting to teach and train and communicate with your workforce. So I do have a client that I'm doing that for, and they're actually two, and they set up their internal mechanisms, and they use Libsyn, and Libsyn does give you the ability to have that secure hosting so you can do an internal podcast. So I found that interesting. I don't know all the specifics because they do that on their end because I'm not part of their organization, but I do know that Libsyn does provide that. Maybe the others do, I just don't know, but that was something I wasn't aware of until I had a client come to me with the purpose of creating an internal podcast that wasn't going to go out into the world. So we talk about statistics, so there's even those, which I think are relatively new, but it's an interesting concept, and those probably aren't going into those statistics that we see about the 500,000 podcasts.
All right. This brings us to our number one list of the week, Jack, and Jack is going to help me with this. The internet loves lists.
What's this now?
Is anyone going to contest me? The internet loves lists, and so every week we do the number one list of the week, and it's determined by me.
Awesome.
We have from WNYC, this is the top 8 super niche, or niche. How would you pronounce that, David? Niche. Super niche podcast. I looked because I was looking for the freakiest, because there's got to be a podcast about toenail clippings, and I couldn't find that, but this was as niche as I could find. So
Which is cool because I am a podcast guy. I love listening to podcasts, so I'm probably going to check some of these out.
Would you listen to the toenail podcast?
It's all I would listen to.
All right,
if
let's search. Let's search and see, guys. Can we see if there is a toenail? Maybe there's a manicure podcast, Mani Petty podcast. Let's find that. All right, so number 8, Jack.
Number 8, The Pen Addict. Just two buddies talking about pens and pen-adjacent accessories.
I like a good pen.
Scott.
It sounds vaguely dirty, but I think it's not. I think it's actually very, very clean.
Number 7 is the Beef and Dairy Network, the number one podcast for those involved or just interested in the production of beef animals and dairy herds. So WNYC is quick to point out that it's actually a very funny, staying in character show.
Can you say more about that?
Well, I think they're they're presenting themselves as beef and dairy nerds when it's actually like Stephen Colbert when he was on The Daily Show. They're not actually.
That's awesome.
I know,
I love
and
this
I'm
idea.
intrigued.
I'm going to check this out. Number 6, Witch Please. 2 literature professors revisit each of the Harry Potter books and movies with a critical bi-weekly feminist analysis.
I wish we had more women on the podcast, including me, who could talk about what a feminist analysis of Harry Potter would be, because I'm sure you can go in depth.
I'm sure you could.
But I don't know how to. Number 5 is, I've actually listened to this podcast. So if you need to be frightened about me, this is adequate reason. The Gilmore Guys. I do love me some Gilmore Girls. I will attest to that. The Gilmore Guys. This one follows 2 comedians who grew up watching Gilmore Girls and one who'd never watched it before as they embark on watching all 7 seasons of the show. Wow. And I kind of did this to my husband, so I would sometimes listen to their show to hear their take on it. My husband seemed to actually love the Gilmore Girls. I don't know if you guys have tried it.
Love it.
But see, it's a great show, right, Ted?
Yes,
it's the best writing.
We caught up to it when it was in the middle, and then we had, through syndication, we had to go back. My wife and I had a printout on the side of the TV, and we had to cross it off when we saw the backlogs, and we did that.
I mean, I would go for walks with my husband, and he would legit say things to me like, "Do you think Luke's going to come around?"
Not nerdy at all. This really does show you that it's really not about a premise per se. It's about you can make anything interesting if you are interesting, right? If you have that flash.
To be interesting. Okay.
It's kind of like you take classes based on professors, not on content.
Right.
It's that same idea.
And even beyond interesting, I think if you have a passion for something, I think that comes through. And I think that, the buzzword this year in corporate America is authenticity. And I think that speaks to the authenticity of loving something so much that you want to talk about it every week.
Well, that's why your podcast works, because you guys obviously
you guys
love
make
trailers
it
and
fun
movies.
and exciting. Yeah.
So, number 4, is that where we are? Yes.
Yes.
I was there too. The host of this podcast, I love this idea, sits down with lesser-known actors from well-known films. What a great
awesome.
idea.
That is a great idea.
I just looked up we were watching Happy Gilmore at lunch, and I
Okay.
looked up the kid actor who was his caddy in that movie, little like redheaded kid. He's not an actor anymore, but I would listen to this for
Right?
sure to
No
find out
kidding,
where
right?
those people are.
Number 3.
Every time we watch shows at home or movies, I'll always tell my kids, or we'll watch them, go, see that guy in that scene? Like, he's telling his kids he was in The Godfather, and he was he was not even in the scene for very long.
Right.
But I think I'm gonna want to check this one out too.
Yeah.
That is fun. Number 3 is Due by Friday. Host Merlin Mann talks to 2 of the creators of the hit card game Cards Against Humanity on a weekly basis with this twist: complete a new challenge by Friday.
I don't understand that.
So he's got. Have you played the game Cards Against?
Is that what it is? It needs inside knowledge? I don't know what a new challenge is.
There's a card game called Cards Against Humanity.
Heard of it.
And it's fun to play because you find yourself saying the most obscene things. And if you play it with your mom, it's especially fun because
don't
you
need
hear
a
your
game for
mom
this,
saying the
Lacey.
most obscene things. She has to say them in order to win the game.
Oh,
And so
okay.
it's just a wacky card game that gets people talking.
Got it.
It's good to play if there's people that don't really know each other.
Yeah.
And then you just crack open the game and
Solid
everyone.
icebreaker.
And drink.
It's and drink, yeah.
It's a brilliant
And so
name.
I guess the guys that created this game will go on this podcast, and the host of the show will say, by Friday, I need you to collect 17 bottle caps and staple them to the head of Betty White. And, well, maybe they've done it. Maybe they haven't. I don't know.
I'm sure that's already been done.
And thank
so
you for
hack.
noticing, Michael. I appreciate that.
Number 2, Jack.
Number 2 is Plugged In. The podcast from the utility Con Edison is about the energy industry. And this is not, I take it, like the other one, which was a staying in character. This is really about Con Edison.
I think so, but it could be what Michael was talking about, where it's sort of a branded corporate.
But then it wouldn't be, oh, no, this isn't most views. This is
No,
about...
this is interesting.
Yeah, okay,
These
got
are
it.
niche. We're in the niche right now,
This
Jack.
actually sounds really interesting to me. I'd like to hear about the energy. I'm serious about the
Okay.
energy industry.
Number 1 is All's Fair, which gets the title for best title, right? All's Fair, this is the official podcast from last year's New York State Fair. So, Michael, are you finding that every company, person, human, organization is calling you and saying, Michael, we need a podcast? And you're going like, Grandma, you don't. I mean, does everyone feel like they need a podcast in order to be legit? Like, I don't
I
exist
wish.
unless I,
I
have a
wish we-
podcast to prove it.
Yeah, I mean, no, not everybody's not calling, but I think that there is, when you look at statistics about podcasting, even though the statistics tell us that a lot of people are listening, that I still think it's in the minority of the population that are actually listening to podcasts. So I think the sky's the limit in terms. There's a lot of upside to it. Let's put it that way. But the challenge, I think, and we haven't talked about this yet, but I think we touched on it a little bit. There's a lot of people out there that want to create podcasts because people reach out to me on a regular basis, and they want to find out how to start. And people have a great idea, they think, and it may be a great idea, but then they may have 4 or 5 episodes that they just can't wait to get recorded, and then they get to episode 6, episode 7. And they kind of ran out of ideas, and they're kind of like, "Uh-oh, what do I do now?" And then their interest starts to wane. It gets to become a burden, and
Sound
then you never see
familiar,
them again. You never hear them again, right? So that's always a challenge. And I do tell people, don't create a podcast to make money. If you're going to create a podcast, make sure you're creating a podcast about something that you love to talk about, and that was already mentioned earlier. That you need to, if there's something that you just feel compelled that you want to talk about, whatever it may be, whether it's an audio drama that you want to create or whether it's a nonfiction type, information type podcast, make sure it's something that you love, because it will get difficult in terms of trying to crank out content on a regular basis, and you have to be consistent to be successful. So people need to know, if you're going to tell people you're going to do it weekly, you got to do it weekly. If you're going to tell them you're going to do it bi-weekly, you got to do it bi-weekly. You can't have these episodes where they're all over the board. I know some people do that, but consistency is the key. And you better make sure you're talking about something that you really love to talk about. I love voiceovers. I love talking to other voice actors. So for me, it is a labor of love. It's a master class every time I have a guest on my podcast. So I'll never get tired of doing that podcast, because I get to talk to people like Jack who come as a guest, and I get to find out what they're doing and learn about them. And I'm passionate about it. So make sure that you have that kind of drive before you get started in this industry.
Yeah, I still haven't received that check, by the way, Mike, just so we're clear.
Yeah, I think
it'll get there eventually.
He said the word passion, and passion begets emotion, right? And that's what these are emotional connections to the listeners, right? And so if you're able to make that connection, just like with radio or TV or any of those things, you're going to have a loyal fan base, right? And it's about how you can continue to evoke those emotions from your listeners on a regular basis.
Can I ask you guys, I mean, you have passionate, passion-fueled podcasts. But there must be times when life does get in the way. What do you do, or do you have a story maybe about a time when something really came up and it was really hard for you to do the job that you wanted to do, to meet your obligations with your podcast? Has anything like that come up for you?
Well, we've only had one missed Thursday in the past year that we've gone. We had a sabbatical, which we talked about on the podcast a couple of weeks before we did it, and then we just took the best, our favorites, and we recut them a little bit. So we just had recuts on for 4 weeks while we were vacationing. But one Thursday, Jimmy just couldn't get the audio nailed down, and he wanted us to, we were actually recording in a room like this, and it was hard to separate the mics out. So you guys do a great job here. And he said, I won't get it out before I go to work. And I said, well, if you get it out after you go to work, it's still a Thursday drop. So we haven't missed one yet. But it's funny when other podcasters that I'm friends with online, when they're missing their day, it's amazing, because we're all just like, we're hobbyists, and we all are out there, and they're like, oh, make sure you get that, so you retweet this, because I'm not going to hit my Thursday, and it's my first time in 2 years, or first time in 4 years that I haven't hit my day. And it's amazing, like the dedication and the love of what they do has just taken over.
All right, so let's assume that you're inspired and you want to start your own podcast. So here we go. These are key steps according to podcasthost.com. And we'll see if you guys agree that these steps are critical and crucial. Plan your podcast from listener to problem to unique solution. Jack, you got the next one?
Sure. Name your podcast and don't take long to do it.
I think they mean use your instincts.
Yep.
Like my show is called Things I Found Online. It didn't take me very long to write that.
Some of the best songs are written in minutes,
Right?
So in other words, what they're saying is the name of your show should be what your show's about, so that there's no confusion.
I'm glad you clarified that. It's like, don't take too long to do it. It's like, it doesn't matter what it is. I see. That makes sense.
Plan initial episodes to get a feel for your topic and its longevity. That's good, because Michael just brought that up.
Choose a format which balances quality and sustainability.
Choose your equipment and use it to record a show.
What is that? What do you think
If you
they're saying
chose
there?
your equipment and then didn't use it, I would say you suck at podcasts.
Party foul.
And I'm not sure what they mean about this. Produce your show in a sustainable way.
Organic,
Don't kill any whales.
I mean,
what are
when
we
they
talking
say
about?
sustainable, I feel like they're talking about what Ted's been talking about.
Yeah.
Like, can you do this? Was the first episode such a big production with all this cutting and field work and music and cues?
Mike said it
that
too.
next week you're just like, oh, I can't.
Right.
Like, it's like when you have one of those workouts where you go where you run 20 miles instead of the usual 10.
I don't know how you work out. But.
No, I know. This is an inflated exaggeration, but you have one of those workouts where you do 20 push-ups instead of 10. Then the next week you're just like, I'm not even going to do it, because you don't have to top yourself every week. You just have to sustain. And some days you're fighting off some sort of cold or something, and you're not going to run or do as many push-ups as you did. And so it's like in podcasting, it's like, don't bite off more than you can chew on a weekly basis. Like, don't be so ambitious that after 3 weeks you're just like, I can't possibly do it again. Like, it's got to be sustainable. I think that's what they mean. Am I right, Michael?
Yeah, I mean, don't overreach in the beginning.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the advice I would give people, because, you can always grow into your podcast. So, Johnny Lee Dumas has had for years, he had a daily podcast, Entrepreneur on Fire. He was the first podcaster to have a daily podcast. And he interviewed people. And he just recently pulled back. He does it, I think, every 2 weeks now, or once a week. But he even says, he goes, when I look back at my first podcast and I listen to myself, I kind of cringe because I realize that I've gotten so much better. But he consistently delivered a podcast every single day, and he grew that thing to millions of listeners because he was consistent and he grew into his podcast. He developed his style. Most people who aren't used to sitting in front of a microphone aren't used to talking in front of a microphone for 20 minutes or 30 minutes or 45 minutes. So don't overreach. Don't try to make it more than it needs to be to begin with. If you have a great idea that you're passionate about, you have great content, you've got a format that's going to work for you that's sustainable, then you can begin, but don't overreach. Grow into your podcast.
And if you think about like sustainability as far as source material, I think you touched on that a little bit. You know, we had talked about doing something about the future, and if we did a podcast about technology in the future, then we'd be reading books about technology in the future and then trying to talk to authors or talk about books. And then like how many books you're going to read over the course of a month, you know, like, and then so we chose something that we're passionate about, but has a spigot that is unending from a whole nother industry that we could cull from.
Yeah, the content it replenishes itself naturally. It's like my show's about the internet. Like I think there's going to be something on the internet tomorrow. So, what's next, Jack?
Publish your podcast to iTunes and elsewhere. Is this not an option? I mean, who wouldn't do that, I guess, is my question.
I mean, you could, like, cassette tapes.
That's a thing.
Is there a barrier to entry?
Or you could just keep it on your own website and
website,
navigate people to the
That's
website.
true.
Right.
But yeah, this is a no-brainer.
Is there something you have to do to, like, as with an app on iTunes, is there anything you have to do to make yourself acceptable? Do you have to prove anything before they will allow you to?
You submit it,
You
and
do.
then there's depending on what service is taking your RSS feed, they have all different benchmarks. Google seems to have a higher benchmark. iHeartRadio, that was tough.
So
That
I
was a
can't.
tough
You
one.
can't have something called the Hitler Hour, and it will just start broadcasting on iTunes. That's probably a good thing. All right.
Think about next steps, promotion, and monetization. I think they spelled it wrong.
I think so.
Making money.
This is
Someone
the
else say
British
the word.
version. Monetization.
Monetization. All right. Let's talk about the RSS feed, because when I started posting my own podcast, I used to have a volunteer posting Wheezy and the Swish, and he used Daryl Pearson. He used Tumblr. You can post to iTunes using Tumblr, but I had to familiarize myself with what is meant by creating an RSS feed. Can we start there by explaining that to people who may be new to it? Michael?
Well, RSS just means really simple syndication. That's my understanding, and it's basically it houses all of the information for your podcast. So it makes sense in a way, because once whatever service you use, whether it's Libsyn or Podbean or Blueberry, whatever you pick, they'll have you create an RSS feed, and you'll give it a name, and that will be your RSS feed for that podcast forevermore. So everything will go through that. So when iTunes directory, when Stitcher, when Google Play, when Spotify, they're going to go, they constantly are culling for RSS feeds. And so that's how you know that they're going to grab your podcast. And it is simple, because once you created that RSS feed and once you have a company that you're uploading through, once you publish to that uploading company, then all these other podcast players simply go and grab your RSS feed. And once you make that initial effort to get onto iTunes, onto Stitcher, set up your accounts in these various podcast players, you're done in terms of uploading. You don't have to upload to iTunes. You only upload to one place, which is, in my client's case, Libsyn. So you don't have to worry about it, because your RSS feed lives there, and they all come and grab that.
Mike, would you take a hit, as you would say with SEO on a website, if you changed the name of that feed?
Yeah, I think so. I don't know exactly, but I do know that Libsyn tells you when you create your RSS feed to think long and hard about it, because you can change it, but it's very difficult.
It
they
breaks.
make it clear to you.
Yeah,
It's very difficult.
we did it. Like I said, we did it. We switched to Podbean because I went into my bedroom and I said, Alexa, play Trailer Junkies podcast. And then it said, it's not available on podbean.com. So I was like, we're switching to Podbean so I can listen to my own podcast in my bed. So it definitely broke. And then it seemed like it was working. And then we had some listeners saying, like, your catalog isn't working. You know, your older stuff isn't linked to that because it has a different RSS feed. But
Yeah.
Mike, I think
That was my fear
Yeah.
too with leaving
yeah,
Libsyn.
and we did it early, and I was like, we got to jump ship and dig in. But I think whether you're with Libsyn or Podbean or anything like that, I love Squarespace, but I would never host a podcast through like a website host. I think it's the one thing that I would say is different between hosting websites and hosting podcasts. I like the idea of the specialty of hosting websites, and they offer it. I think they offer it, and they want to do that for you. But I like the idea of being able to go out, like the podcast hosts are, dedicated to podcast audio.
How do you feel about having a standalone website in addition to your Libsyn site or your Podbean site?
I think it's a must. From a marketing perspective, I think it's a must. I know Podbean really likes to bring people into the Podbean environment, and we have followers within Podbean, but it's just so restricting to be inside that space. And if you're not part of that community, then there's no real purpose for you to be there. So I like the freedom of having the website that's independent of it and the social media accounts that are separate from it as well. So,
And what do you?
Yeah, I agree with that.
So what do you recommend for your clients, Michael?
Well, I mean, definitely I recommend that they have a website. Now, within Libsyn, similar to Podbean, you can create, they have a website set up for you. So you can have a website where you can direct people to, and we do that for the Learning Innovations podcast, or you can create a separate website and then have a podcast player that's embedded on your site. And we use Pat Flynn's podcast player for our for mine and for my clients. So, but there are others out there that you can do some research on. And essentially what they do is they embed right onto your website. You have your web designer put that onto your website, and then similarly, they just grab your RSS feed, and you don't have to do anything. That podcast player that's embedded on your site will automatically grab each episode and put it up on your website. So you really do need, I mean, the goal they talk about that on that list, is once you've created your podcast, you do want to try to get it out there to the world. And people like being able to go to a website as opposed to sometimes having to go to one of these providers like iTunes or Stitcher. They like the idea of going to the website, finding it, and playing it. So just giving them more options always makes sense from a marketing standpoint.
How does everyone feel about conventions and meetups and that kind of thing for the people in the podcasting universe? Is that a great idea to network and to fly out to Philadelphia or wherever something big is happening?
Orlando next year, yeah.
Is it?
I mean, I missed it by a year because it was in LA last year, I guess, and now this year is in Philly, and next year is Orlando. So I'm waiting because I'm not going to travel for this yet. So yeah, I think it's great. It's great to have meetups. I think that's why I do the social so deeply, and I try to help. Like I said, the goodwill of helping new podcasters or people that are 5-10 episodes in, and if they have questions or they a lot of people will say like, oh, I want to see how's your service. We do a lot of crowdsourcing of information and sharing of the audiences, and when we're in a space that's very specific to a genre, then it makes sense. But it's a lot of fun to just hang out with other people.
Well, the word fun is interesting because in the VO world and other worlds too, these conventions often are about just getting together and having fun with your peers, especially in a business where you're kind of lonely. Do you think it's more about that with maybe the new podcast convention and of similar ilk? Or do you think it's more about let's help you develop your business or just some combination?
I mean, it is a cow, it's a dinner bell for any from podcast hosts and for microphone companies and Scarlett, Focusrite, all the preamps and all that stuff, all the equipment. But yeah, it is. I think there's two things you're talking about, like conventions that are not related to podcasts. I love the idea of brand extension through podcasts. So you have podcasts that happen while you're doing your convention, and then through the year, you identify industry leaders and you kind of have them do a sustaining podcast. So you keep people engaged that are engaged enough to go to a conference in Vegas every year then they're probably bought in enough to get them monthly to come to a podcast, and then you have a platform, when 11 months comes around to say, hey, it's coming up, or 6 months, and then you can keep the engagement going. A lot of times when we push movies, if you push a movie by a year, they're like, oh, we got to get more content out for, the Cars franchise or something, because we aren't going to have a movie this year, so we push it off another year, so we make little shorts. And I think that's very similar if you're doing anything that is any kind of brand orientation or anything that needs like time over years.
Scott, do you go to these conventions?
I have not personally. The president of our company went to Philly this year, and I think it's all about finding out what resources are out there for people too, right? I mean, it's nobody wants to talk about podcasts more than other podcasters. You know what I mean? Just like nobody wants to talk about VO other than more than other VO artists, right?
The only people who want to talk about it.
Exactly. And if you can get drunk while doing it, even better. So you're going to do these things at these conferences, right? And you're going to figure out what resources there are that are out there in one place. Every industry does it, right? They all have their big conferences, whether it's a snowboard company or television or movies or whatever it is. And so, I think it's, this is still a relatively small business too, right? Podcasting is, I mean, it's less than $1 billion and not projected to be double what it is for another couple of years. So, I mean, the more that people come out and share their resources and continue to talk about it furthers the agenda itself, right? So.
Right. And I come from radio, so I've been to my share of radio conventions, and I've been told by fellow podcasters that when you go to a podcasting convention, everybody is just so upbeat and friendly and happy, because I think they recognize they're on the cusp of something. And if you go to a radio convention, everybody's kind of dour, and they've got their badge and their beer, and they're like, they're just trying to hang on to their job,
right?
For
Radio's
another
been
Christmas.
dead for the last 30 years. I don't know about this.
Right. So I think that everyone feels the optimism of, wait, this is an adventure. Let's see what's going to be around the next corner.
Interesting that you say that, though, is that a lot of the benchmarks of podcasters is trying to get onto radio past their podcast. So that's another interesting point to bring up, though, right?
It is.
That
it is.
That's
Can we
what
talk
people
about
want
that?
to do, right?
Yeah.
They want to take their podcast to radio, to these platforms.
Is that the goal, though, Michael? Isn't everyone in radio trying to figure out how to make a podcast?
Well, it seems that way. I mean, but still, radio still is the dominant, mechanism for people to listen to things. So we talk about the end of radio, but radio, I think, is going to be around for a long, long time. So I don't know that podcasting is going to usurp it. But the thing that the key to podcasting is the intimacy of it, because you have that ability to speak into people's ears about a specific topic that they're interested in, and they can listen to it when they want to. So that's really the advantage that podcasting has over the radio industry. And I referenced Johnny Lee Dumas from EO Fire, and he started his podcast specifically because he ran out of things to listen to on his iPod, and he couldn't bear listening to Britney Spears for another 20 minutes on his commute, or listening to artists singing to him. And he wanted to hear things that he wanted to listen to. So he's like, look, nothing's out there, so I'm going to create it myself. So that's the key. I don't know. We compare podcasting to radio a lot, but I don't really think that they're very similar other than we listen to them. But the intimacy of podcasting about a specific niche, that's about what you want to listen to when you want to listen to it. That's where the explosion of podcasting is coming from. Because if you think about iTunes and just music in general, people used to buy, when I was a kid, we would buy albums or cassettes or 8-tracks. The over 90% of all the purchases on iTunes are for single tracks. So people are they want to pick the song that they want to listen to, and they want to put it into their playlist.
Right.
And so it's that specificity and the on-demand aspect of it that I think makes podcasts so engaging and enchanting and exciting and exhilarating about the future of them, because that's the key.
Yeah, it's like the magazine space was when we were kids, and you go into the drugstore and there would be a magazine about knitting and one about motorcycles. And coming from the world of radio, I always felt like radio was a few years behind television, because every radio station is kind of a mom and pop. I mean, they were getting bought up by Clear Channel and all that, but they didn't have the equipment that the TV station across the street had, to be getting satellite delivery of shows or whatever. So we were still sending, Premier Radio was still sending people their content via reel-to-reel and old school, and we were faxing them jokes overnight. There wasn't any immediate delivery, and you weren't expecting the radio station to have any new equipment. This is pre-internet, And now I feel like that may be to their advantage because your kids are not going to watch television. They're not going to sign up for any cable package at all. But they may get in their car and turn on an AM radio station to listen to a game or something. Like, I think that the radio towers may be there long after the TV towers are gone. What do you guys think of that?
I agree with that. And I think that, once radio catches up with the time shifting of the content that they create now, then that's going to be the game changer, right? They're starting to get there, and the networks are launching podcasts and those kinds of things. But if they take their jocks offline and they do content outside of what you hear on the air of the local and immediacy, right? And you give them a brand that people care about that they can then seek out and listen to anytime. I think that's the time shifting. I think, like you said, the availability of podcasts is what makes it efficient.
And
right?
I think WNYC is the model.
Yeah.
They have whatever's on the air on their 3 stations, and then they have WNYC studios. And it's pretty easy to see what the model is. If you want to sustain a tower, you've got to also create content, maybe branded content or what have you, because the signal isn't going anywhere. It's in the air and it's free. You may as well put something up there.
Yeah, that's
but you
right.
also have to create podcasts.
Yeah, and you have to.
I'm sorry.
I was just gonna say, and you have to create quality podcasts,
Sure,
right?
sure,
and you
sure.
have to create things that are framed a certain way, right? That tell a story a certain way, right? If you want to be an artist, eventually you're gonna stop hanging your picture on the wall with a piece of tape, right? You're gonna put it in a nice frame, and so that's what the podcast, podcasters need to work on is how they frame their messages, right, and how they frame their stories.
Yeah, because
And I think
in radio, people have gotten over the last like 50 years. It's like, oh, you just need like a playlist and a guy who sounds cool like Jack, and it's like the music industry has been your content. So now people are like, oh yeah, no, I want to hear something. I want to hear people talking about what interests me. Go ahead, Michael.
Well, I was just going to say that, we love to compare things, right? We love to compare podcasts to radio, and we like to think about what television is and will television ever, will it exist in the future? And, I just think it's the way we perceive things. So radio and podcasting are very different, as we just mentioned. And I think the way people, when we think about TV, so we don't have, we're not all crowding around the TV on Thursday night for the next episode of Seinfeld anymore. Those days are over. We are, my children and their generation it's on demand when I want it and what I want to watch. So I think the definition, television is defined in a certain way. The way people are watching content, video content, is changing to the point where I don't even know that we can call it television anymore. It's just a consumption of video entertainment that they're utilizing in a completely different way.
Right.
My children, my 20-year-old, my 18-year-old, and even our 14-year-old, not so much our 8-year-old, but they watch their content on their computer. They hardly ever watch it on their TV. And if it is on their TV, it's on Hulu or Netflix or some streaming service that is not waiting for the sitcom to come out on Thursday night. It's just not how they consume it anymore. So it's completely changed.
But for me, it's like I want the quality experience. I want my big screen, my 4K. I want this, my surround sound. That's a big part of my enjoying this wonderful content that's out there these days. I mean, the things that Netflix and Amazon and all these companies are putting out are insanely good, and they can sound and look fantastic. So for me, to watch something on my phone, it's not just, I don't think it's just because I'm a dinosaur. I think it's also because there's always going to be that segment of the population that really wants an experience that's qualitatively different than, some crappy.
Let me make this observation, Jack. When Michael's kids have their own home, they may recreate that experience with a home theater setting because privacy won't be an issue. But when you're 14, you really want to watch something that's yours. And so you create a little space on your bed or on the corner of the couch.
That makes perfect sense, Wheezy. Yeah.
So that's what I think is going to. It will be on demand, but they'll create a better viewing setting for themselves when they don't have to worry about their brother or sister coming in and going, "What are you doing? What do you want? Well, he's stupid. Why?" They kind of want their own. They're sort of creating a little nook for themselves.
Yeah, they want to curate their own playlist, right?
Sure.
They want to have their own Facebook feeds and their own Instagram feeds and post their own pictures and do their own thing.
And when they have Jack Daniel money, they're going to create a man den.
That's right.
It's time for Facebook feed time.
Awesome.
And there was a lot going on in the news today. So from my Facebook friend, Lydia Cornell, who was on Empty Nest. So she posted on Facebook, "It's a sad day when Bill Cosby, one of my..."
Too close for comfort, right?
I think it's Too Close for Comfort. Was that it?
Was that the?
Look up Lydia. I should know what show she was in. It's a sad day when Bill Cosby, one of my comedy icons, is proven to be a criminal character and put in prison for sexual assault. Celebrities are in free fall from our decadent, amoral, hyper-capitalistic culture where women are sex objects and commodities. Cosby helped me craft some stage material in Reno with Debbie Reynolds, Norm Crosby, and Andy Griffith. I admired him and looked up to him. He was very authoritarian, though. Today was the day that Bill Cosby got sentenced.
Right.
And it's interesting that it's coming within the cloud of the whole Kavanaugh controversy and
He
how
got years too, right? I mean, it was
3 to 10.
3 to, yeah.
Yeah, and so it's shocking and it's terrifying.
Too closer.
Too Close for Comfort? Okay. What was Empty Nest then?
Empty Nest was later on. It was the.
Was it also Ted Knight though?
No, it was on the beach. I know. I see the opening sequence.
I love how this guy, he's really an encyclopedia. Oh, wait, we have the answer.
Here we go.
Like a quick trivia.
Okay, you have to get in front of a microphone though.
Empty Nest is actually a spin-off of The Golden Girls. I don't know if you guys know that.
What?
Good fact.
Who was related to who on the Golden Girls?
Dave Leisure? Dave Leisure? Is that the one?
But she wasn't even on that show, right, Lydia? What show was Lydia on?
Lydia was on Too Close for Comfort.
Lydia was on Too Close to Comfort.
She was the blonde.
Lydia
the
was on Too Close for Comfort with Ted Knight.
So it's Richard Mulligan.
Oh, Richard
Yes.
Mulligan.
Yeah, and he was appeared as the doctor on Golden Girls as a local doctor, and then they gave him his own show.
Okay, but Bill Cosby
So it was a
is
Frasier
still
type of
a
situation.
criminal.
Exactly.
Sorry.
The point of the
My
story
bad.
is that Lydia played one of those sexy girls.
Yes.
And she probably was exposed to a lot of people that wanted to take advantage of her, and or when you read the comments under her thread, there were a lot of people saying, "Oh, if a guy even looks at a girl the wrong way, he's going to be accused of this or that." And then somebody responded with, "He drugged people and raped them.
Yeah.
That this isn't a gray area."
No, it's horrifying. And I read one of his victims was talking about having been 30 years old and being an athlete in the prime of her life, and always having prided herself on her her ability to move through the world and to have control over her body, and she was robbed of that control, and she's been traumatized for the rest of her life now. It's horrifying. I'm glad I could bring everybody down.
Well, I
Edit
don't
that
know
in
that
post.
there's a fun way to talk about this.
No, there's not.
It's just interesting that it takes this long for that type of a figure to be brought to justice. He's such an important icon, and his work was so excellent
Yeah.
that nobody wanted to believe it until the tipping point came. And then when it came, there were just a multitude of women who were just saying, "Me too." And
Right.
they were all outside the courtroom in the rain, sobbing. And it was...
Yeah. As opposed to me, where people were just dying to believe it. They're just waiting for the
Please
opportunity.
tell me that Jack, because I'm just trying to get that guy one way or the other.
I think you're right. There is no fun way to talk about this.
No. And we've tried, but we're going to stop. So
And it
what's
failed.
Twitter trending is a little more uplifting. What's Twitter trending is National Voter Registration Day. So we have a post from Michelle Obama and John Lewis. What do you want to start with, guys? Lots of inspirational people. Can you put the sound on her? Because I'm sure she wants us to share this.
There's another election coming up on November 6th. That's right, it's almost here. And this election is your chance to hold your leaders accountable. It's how you make your voice heard on everything from your kids' education to the safety of your community. That's why it's so important to register right now and vote on November 6th. And in every election, go to whenweallvote.org or text We All Vote to 97779 to get registered.
All right, is everybody here registered to vote?
You bet.
Yeah.
Boys in the studio? You guys registered to vote?
Our
David?
youth, yes.
Yay.
All right, guys.
All right, we're going to wrap up our show. I hope that you will follow us and subscribe and leave a lovely comment or review in the iTunes store. Share us on your social media. We want to be your new favorite podcast in addition to...
Trailer Junkies Podcast.
In addition to Michael.
TrailerJunkiesPodcast.com.
You can go to the Mike Lenz VO podcast, but you can find everything over at MikeLenzVoice.com.
Excellent. You guys have been fabulous guests. Thank you so much for sharing your time with me. Scott, what would you like to plug?
Yeah, benstown.com/podcast. You can check out the production library there. We can create custom intros for you. You can also listen to the Podcaster's Playbook, which is a limited series, if you will, on how to create a podcast. benstown.com/podcast.
All right, I'm Louise Palanker with Jack Daniel. Thank you so much. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
Bye.